Hey everybody, it's Alex Meller at Capnion here. Today I would like to talk about LangChain and LLM-driven application development in general, in the sense of an application like a chatbot that has an LLM in it. Talk about it in the most basic way I possibly can of you're just some person writing code. What are you trying to build? Why would you pick up a tool like this? What's in it and why? How will I look at it today? It's just a very basic practical decision to use it. And what am I going to be doing with it? In emerging technology, there's always a little bit of excitement, and excitement always leads a little bit to mysticism, in my judgment. And I'd like to be very boring and practical about this topic for you today. So the place to start is with LLM itself. I'm going to talk about ChatGPT. ChatGPT, if you play with it on the web, for purposes of this conversation, it's worth pointing out, I would say that what you play with on the web is not ChatGPT. It is a very simple web app created using the ChatGPT API. Well, what do I mean by this? And we'll get even into what's in an API. Instead of playing with ChatGPT on the web, I could write some Python code, and I could import a special library that would allow me to talk remotely to something a lot like that ChatGPT web app over the web, and I would get the response back as a blob of text in Python. The most basic reason we're interested in this is, well, maybe we want to build an app in Python that uses ChatGPT. This is how we would do it. And that app would look like staging a web page, except there would be some segment of the code that was for talking to ChatGPT. I think this is great to point out to get started, because there are a few choices that creating that web app ChatGPT that you go to in your browser, like, it remembers a certain amount of past conversation. If you talk to it forever, it doesn't remember the first thing you said, but it remembers several steps back in the conversation. And that is something that the API does not do. The API, everything you send it is a totally isolated thing. So when you create a web app, you make that choice of, you're going to provide ChatGPT every time with some context about past conversation. There's a lot of different ways you can do it. How far back in the conversation do we go? How hard are we summarizing past conversation? Are we including the whole thing? That becomes untenable pretty fast. You can make a digest of past conversation in some way. So these are all decisions about making an app that's driven by the ChatGPT API. And they're all under the hood if you're playing with that thing on the web. Okay, where does LangChain enter the picture? LangChain, let's just talk about it from a very tangible perspective. You're a developer. You're trying to build an LLM-driven app. And LangChain is just some library you import because you're trying to write better code faster to make something that works better. What kind of stuff is in LangChain? Well, first off, it's going to be true of a great many people. If you're doing what I described a moment ago, you're building something with the ChatGPT API, you're going to do a lot of the same things. Everybody everywhere trying to build that thing is going to encounter some of the same problems, probably going to solve them basically the same way. So it's going to come up for you, probably, that you would like your chatbot to remember a little bit of past conversation and not just totally react to the most immediate message. Because I think this is pretty obvious for most applications. You need something like this. So you've got to write some code to gather up the past conversation and summarize it and format it correctly and put it in the new prompt. That is the kind of thing that is in LangChain, that is in one thing that is in LangChain. They have a lot of machinery for doing things like that. And then it's worth emphasizing, I would say broadly, basically everything in it is some kind of flavor of this, some kind of brass tacks problem that basically everybody is going to encounter if they make a sufficiently fancy app using LLM. and they are making an attempt at doing what you would have done for yourself. So another one is templates for prompts. If you've taken the path through life that I have, you've probably written some kind of templating scheme for SQL every 9 months of your life, something like that. It just comes up a lot. And you can easily see, for example, you're making a chatbot. The chatbot needs to have some very introductory conversation about it's maybe going to present a fake name or something like that. The person talking to it has a name. So there's going to be some kind of standard prompt of, hey, ChatGPT, write a greeting from somebody with this name to somebody with that name and say that you're going to talk about topic XYZ. And so this is very basic, I would emphasize. This is something that's in LangChain. It's pretty important. It's going to come up all the time. And you're just, on some level, you're just cutting and pasting things like, there's all kinds of functions in Python for this. It's super duper basic. But yet it is really something that's kind of important. It's going to come up again and again. And maybe you would like some system for managing all these templates in a uniform way. And LangChain is going to provide that. There's also things like you can pretty rapidly get into, I'm building this fancy application that's supposed to be talking to people. There's one kind of prompt and one kind of interaction with the API, the ChatGPT API, that is directly giving me the things that my application is supposed to say to somebody else. But then I feel like it comes up really fast, faster than you would think. Oh, but then I don't exactly know how to handle this prompt. Maybe the user said something weird. You know who's in the room that might be really great for asking these questions? You ask ChatGPT. And once again, when we're using the API, it has no memory of past conversations. So I could send it like a message that a user sent and say, hey, could you analyze this message? Are they mad? What exactly are they asking for? And then I'm going to have maybe a bunch more conventional logic in my application in response to that. That's a great trick that I think everybody that tinkers with this stuff, it comes to them pretty quickly. This is the genesis of a lot of what is called agents in these libraries. In that, well, now I have two very different functions in play that I'm using the ChatGPT API for in my application. On the one hand, it is directly serving as the chatbot. But on the other hand, it's also sort of my friend that I ask all these weird questions about what questions I should be asking it later in my prompt to actually get the thing I'm going to send back to the user. And agents are kind of shorthand for keeping track of this, and that I want a way to separate the two functions from one another, and I'm going to kind of personify them as agents to keep this clear and make sure everything is being handled in the right way. So in this whole video, I'm not going to give a huge introduction to LangChain. I'm not going to talk about everything it does. It's very new, and they're adding things all the time. I don't really want to endorse or not endorse. I've heard some complaints it's a little rickety. Maybe that's fatal, maybe it's not. I think the real spirit of this video is these are all things you could write yourself and that you might reinvent on your own pretty quickly once you're in the pit dealing with these issues that everybody else has dealt with. And having that kind of frame, I think, is going to really help you use and evaluate this thing if that's ever part of your world. Yes, I could absolutely write these things myself. Maybe because I could write them myself and I know that I have particular needs, I understand what I'm doing. Maybe you should just write yourself. Some people write these things themselves. At the other end of the spectrum, there's plenty of danger of reinventing the wheel if you're dealing with a lot of weird templates and it's getting weird, if you're calling ChatGPT for 10 different reasons and you keep sending the wrong kind of prompt in the wrong place. Somebody has already been thinking about these problems and bringing in a library that's going to provide you a structure that implicitly embodies the analysis of how to approach these problems of other experienced people could just save you a lot of time. And it's up to you, and these things are going to change really fast, but worth looking at.